Welcome. My name is Judea. I'm a clairvoyant medium, spiritual guide, and teacher. Throughout my life, I've encountered beings and had visions that revealed profound insights. Here, I share the stories and lessons that returned with me. May they awaken wonder, curiosity, or validate your own perceptions of the magical, multidimensional reality we live in. I am a vision keeper, and this is my journey between worlds. One of the great designs of our reality is that even after someone leaves the physical world, communication with those still living remains possible. There is, however, much to understand about how spirit communication works. Many factors influence how messages are received, including where a spirit is in their transition and the sensitivity or openness of the person receiving the communication. To begin, it's important to understand that spirits can exist in different stages after leaving the body. The circumstances of their passing often determine how quickly or smoothly they move through these stages. For simplicity, these stages can be imagined as different floors of a building. On the lowest floor are suffering spirits. Those who are confused about their passing are weighed down by the unresolved emotions, fears, attachments, or trauma from their lives. These spirits tend to remain very close to the earthly realm, often caught in loops of confusion, not fully aware that they've died or unsure of how to move forward. From there, spirits who are still heavily burdened but ready to transition may move into what can be understood as an astral hospital or holding and healing space. Here, their spirit body is tended to and repaired, allowing them to release deeper wounds before continuing their journey. Following this healing phase, spirits enter a period of life review. In this space, they reflect on their actions and the impact those actions had on others. It is a time of learning, understanding, and gaining insight into lessons that may have been missed during life. Finally, there's a full crossing into the light. In this stage, spirits are welcomed by loved ones and illuminated beings who have already crossed over. They are released from the weight and burdens of their earthly experience and realigned into their highest, clearest expression, returning to a pure state of unconditional love. On the other end of the exchange are the people who receive the messages. These may be innocent bystanders in the earthly realm, individuals who are naturally open and sensitive, and who inadvertently experience spiritual phenomenon. They may also be loved ones left behind. When a strong emotional or soul bond exists, communication can sometimes come through more easily. Then there are self-aware spirit mediums, each operating at different stages of development and ability. There's a common misconception that a spirit medium easily communicates with loved ones who have crossed over and with ghosts associated with hauntings. This is not necessarily the case. Some mediums are more adept at communicating with suffering spirits, while others are more attuned to those who have fully crossed into the light. Vibrationally speaking, these types of spirits exist at very different levels, like being on different floors of a building. And clear communication requires a medium who is tuned into those particular floors of spiritual existence, including transitional spaces such as the astral hospital or the place of life review. In my own experience, I've had a particularly strong lens for seeing and communicating with suffering spirits. Communicating with spirits who have fully crossed into the light has been more challenging for me. Not that it doesn't happen at all, but it occurs more rarely. When it does, the communication may come through differently from that of a medium who more easily accesses these higher vibrational states. Likewise, a medium who communicates more readily with fully crossed spirits may find it difficult to attune to suffering spirits. Over the years, through continuous development and expansion, I've had many profound encounters with spirits at various stages of their transition, including those who have fully crossed into the light. Still, my work has largely focused on helping suffering spirits find their passage forward. That said, there have been a few deeply memorable experiences in which spirits who had already crossed or are about to cross used me as a medium to deliver messages to the loved ones they leave behind. Back in 2011, I was checking in with my grandmother, as we normally did every few months, catching up over the phone, and sharing news about what was happening within our extended family. During that call, she told me that several hardships had recently unfolded. My uncle had lost all of his belongings in a fire, someone who already had very little to begin with, and my aunt's husband had passed away a few months prior. I wasn't particularly close with either of them. I mostly knew them from childhood, and as I moved into adulthood, I only heard about them occasionally through other family members. I had met my aunt's husband just once. He was someone she had married in more recent years. Even though I wasn't especially close to either of them, I felt a deep sense of compassion. My aunt and her husband had a young daughter together, and I could only imagine how devastating his death must have been for her and their child. I was told that he had been diagnosed with a terminal illness and passed away very shortly after the diagnosis. It came as a shock to everyone, leaving little time to prepare. I also felt strongly for my uncle. Knowing how difficult his life had already been and how little he had, I could only imagine how overwhelming it must have been to lose everything. Moved by this, I decided to put together a care package for him, basic necessities like clothes and shoes to help in whatever small way I could. Over the next few days, I shopped around, gathering items I thought he might need or appreciate, and eventually prepared a package to send. As I was going through this process, something peculiar began to happen. I was doing chores around the house one day when a sudden wave of energy washed over me. With it came an overwhelming sense of peace and calm. In my mind's eye, a scene opened up, a beautiful vista of a lush green valley beneath a glowing sunset. It was so perfect, so breathtaking, that it felt heavenly. Interwoven within this imagery was the presence of a man. I heard his voice clearly and distinctly say, "Tell her I've made it, and I'm okay." The message was simple and direct. Shocked by what I had just seen and heard, I shook my head in disbelief. It had come on so suddenly and with such force that my immediate reaction was, "This can't be happening." But once again, the energy filled the space around me, and I heard the same words repeated: "Tell her I've made it, and I'm okay." Instantly, I knew it was the spirit of my aunt's husband. The man I had just learned had passed away. Just as quickly, I dismissed it. Impossible, I told myself. I'm making this up. The news is fresh in my mind, and my imagination is running wild. I brushed it off and continued with my day. A few days later, while alone in my house and completely off guard, the experience happened again, this time even stronger. A deep wash of peace and tranquility came over me, and another scene opened in my mind's eye, even more vivid and luminous than before. It was a pristine, flawless landscape and a beautiful sunset, what my heart recognized as a heavenly realm. Once again, his presence was there, and I heard his voice clearly say, "Tell her I made it, and I'm okay." With all my knowing, I knew it was my aunt's husband. As the biggest skeptic of my own experiences, I immediately shut it down. Oh, please, I thought. This is the most generic message anyone could possibly give. My aunt didn't even know I had these kind of abilities, and from what I remembered of her, I suspected she would judge me harshly if I brought this to her. I had no desire to pass the message along, even though the intensity of the experience itself was almost undeniable. At that point in my life, I had come to terms with the idea that I possessed extrasensory abilities, though I was still learning to understand what they were. I often wrestled with the fear that I was simply imagining things, or that none of it was real. Up until then, every spirit encounter I had experienced involved earthbound suffering spirits in need of crossing over. I had glimpses of transitional states, the astral hospitals, moments of life review, but I had never encountered a spirit who had fully crossed into the light. Here, however, it felt unmistakably clear. My aunt's husband was in the light, fully at peace, and seemed to be offering me a brief glimpse from his perspective while asking me to deliver a message to my aunt. The last thing I wanted was to approach her, someone I believed would dismiss or judge the idea of mediumship, and risk disturbing her already tender grief with what sounded like an unbelievable claim that her husband, a man I barely knew, had reached out to me. It all felt absurd. Finally, I spoke back internally. "That's far too general. There's nothing in this that could prove to her it's really you." I told him to go away and leave me alone, uncertain whether what I was experiencing was legitimate. After that encounter, I couldn't stop thinking about it. While it was happening, it felt undeniably real, yet once it passed, it seemed almost far-fetched. The following days were quiet as I finished assembling the care package I planned to send to my uncle. As I worked, a subtle sense of guilt began to surface, as though I might be letting my aunt's husband down by ignoring what had happened. Since I was already sending a package, I began to consider whether I could include a letter from my aunt, something gently explaining the experience. I started to imagine what that might look like, and so in a quiet telepathic way, I spoke to my aunt's husband. Okay, if you appear to me one more time before I send this package, and if it's undeniably clear, I'll deliver your message. The day came when I was ready to assemble everything and send it off. As soon as I woke up, I went to the bathroom to brush my teeth, and there it happened a third time, stronger and clearer than the previous two experiences. As I remember it, I was looking at my reflection in the mirror, and it was as though my image dissolved. In its place, a living, moving, breathing scene of a stunning sunset landscape appeared before me, almost like a high-definition movie playing in front of my eyes. It was vivid, detailed, and filled with light. That same profound wash of peace and love surrounded me. I stood there in awe, completely lucid, completely present, and this time it was undeniable. In the boldest, clearest voice yet, I heard and felt him say, "Please, please tell her I made it and that I'm okay." I could feel the desperation and importance of the message from his point of view, and then the experience faded. Wow, I thought, I can't deny that one. He had followed through exactly as I asked. I understood what he wanted. He wanted her to know that he had made it to heaven. Even though the message still felt generic to me, I chose not to judge it. Perhaps it would bring her comfort in a way I couldn't anticipate. I went straight to my computer and began typing her letter. I explained that I have the ability to see and communicate with spirits. I told her that in my experience, the spirits I had encountered up until then were usually stuck, trapped in some form of limbo, sometimes for many years, and that helping them cross into the light was not always simple. I then shared something that felt especially important, that of all the spirit encounters I had experienced, her husband was the first I had ever seen who was already fully crossed into the light. It felt as though he had wasted no time lingering, that his passage had been swift and beautiful, fully embracing his transition. I described the heavenly realm as I had seen it, and told her that he was surrounded by peace, love, and serenity, and that he very much wanted her to know that he had made it there and that he was okay. Afterwards, I wrote a separate letter to my uncle, expressing my condolences for the fire and offering encouragement and well wishes as he began rebuilding his life. I placed each letter into its own envelope, labeled with their names, and then put both of those in a larger manila envelope addressed to my grandmother so she could pass them along. As I was sealing the envelope, something else came to mind. Years earlier, I had bought a small hummingbird pin at a yard sale and had always intended to give it to my grandmother, who loved hummingbirds. I had forgotten to send it to her multiple times, but suddenly I remembered. With the glue on the envelope freshly licked and moments away from sealing, I rushed to my jewelry box, grabbed the pin, wrapped it quickly in a tissue, and slipped it into the envelope, assuming my grandmother would recognize it was meant for her. I sealed the envelope, placed it into the care package, and sent it off. About 2 weeks later, I received a phone call from my grandmother. She was highly emotional and could barely find the words to tell me what had happened after she received the care package. I was already filled with nerves. Truthfully, I had begun to regret writing that letter to my aunt and found myself bracing for how I imagined she might have reacted. I hadn't told my grandmother that I had included the letter from my aunt, nor had I explained its contents. My grandmother's voice was trembling, and I immediately knew she was aware of the letter. She told me that when the care package arrived, she opened the manila envelope and saw the letters inside. She was surprised to find one addressed to my aunt. Since she was planning to see her in the coming days, she left that letter in the envelope, took out the one from my uncle, and gave it to him along with the care package I had assembled. She said my uncle was genuinely moved. He lit up when he received it, feeling seen, cared for, and loved, and was especially surprised it had come from me, given that we hadn't really had a close relationship. That alone meant a great deal to him. A few days later, my grandmother went to my aunt's house. She pulled the envelope from the manila folder and handed it to her, saying, "I don't know what this is, but it's for you." My grandmother sat quietly as my aunt opened the letter and began reading. She watched as my aunt began to cry. My grandmother, unsure of what I had written, listened to my aunt read the letter aloud to her. The message deeply moved her. It brought her a profound sense of peace. Both of them were emotional, stunned, quiet, and momentarily at a loss for words. As my grandmother reached for the manila envelope to put the letter back inside, something unexpected happened. The wadded up tissue I had thrown in there last minute fell out onto the table with a noticeable clunk, making it clear there was something inside of it. My grandmother said to me, "I didn't know what it was, but I knew it was important." Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely unfold the tissue. When she finally opened it, she discovered the hummingbird pin. Instantly, my aunt cried out her husband's name as she pointed to the pin and began sobbing uncontrollably. My grandmother immediately understood the significance of that moment, why the hummingbird pin had appeared exactly then, and why it carried such weight for my aunt. My grandmother then explained something I hadn't known. The year before my aunt's husband passed away, he had been involved in a scandal involving money embezzlement from the company he worked for. For many years, he had been a respected figure in his community and well regarded in his profession. So when this came to light, the fallout was devastating. He was fired, faced legal battles, and the situation brought tremendous shame, financial strain, and emotional hardship to him and his family. It had been an incredibly difficult year, first being exposed and publicly condemned for stealing, and then not long after, being diagnosed with a terminal illness and dying suddenly. Because the family was caught in a whirlwind of scrutiny and judgment from their community, when he passed, my aunt became consumed with fear. She worried constantly that because of his actions, her husband might have been sent to hell. She feared he was suffering. Having little understanding of spiritual matters surrounding death, she reached out to a local priest for grief counseling and guidance. Unfortunately, his words only deepened her distress. He reinforced the idea that her husband's sins could condemn him unless he had fully repented and atoned, and that they needed to pray fervently for his salvation so that he would not be damned to suffer. One day, during a visit from the priest, they were sitting at a kitchen table near a window speaking about her husband, when a hummingbird suddenly appeared outside the glass. It hovered there, only inches from my aunt, and stayed far longer than felt normal. The moment felt unusual, almost magical. Her heart lifted, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a spark of hope. She turned to the priest and asked with quiet excitement, "Do you think this could be my husband? Do you think this might be a sign that he's okay?" The priest shut her down immediately. "No," he said coldly. "That's just a hummingbird. That's not how these things work." He dismissed the idea entirely, telling her to remove such thoughts from her mind. Her husband, he insisted, was a sinner who needed to be prayed for, and only through prayer might God show mercy on his soul. That brief moment of hope was extinguished. From that point on, my aunt lived in constant fear that her husband was suffering, that his soul was trapped or condemned. She carried that worry every day. Knowing this, my grandmother understood immediately why the message I had sent could not have been more precise. Of all possible messages, "I've made it, and I'm okay," was the exact reassurance my aunt needed to hear. And when the hummingbird pin fell onto the table at that moment, it brought everything together, confirming the truth of the message in a way words alone never could. For the first time since his death, my aunt was able to release her fear. She found peace in the knowing that her husband had made it to heaven and that he was no longer suffering. Another experience I had came a few years later, in 2013, when I was in the process of working towards my Reiki certification. As part of the training, I was required to complete a certain number of hours of self Reiki. I would set aside time in the evenings, retreat to my room, and conduct these sessions alone. They consistently brought me into a deeply relaxed meditative state. In the middle of one of these sessions, I suddenly became aware of a very strong presence beside me. At first, I was confused by what was happening, but the presence was so pronounced, so insistent, that I couldn't deny it was there. It felt as though it was urgently seeking my attention. Almost immediately, I sensed familiarity. The presence felt like an older man, and my first intuitive hit was startling. It's my grandfather. Seeing him in spirit form took me off guard, and it took a moment for my mind to catch up. "Grandpa?" I thought. "What are you doing here?" My grandfather wasn't dead. He was still alive, living in upstate New York, while I was in California at the time. I knew he had been battling cancer, but I didn't know the details of his condition. Seeing him appear in this way was alarming and unexpected. Then I heard his voice, gruff, familiar, unmistakably his. "I want to die, but I don't know how." The weight of those words hit me all at once. I could feel his fear of the unknown. I could also feel how exhausted he was, how much effort it was taking for him to hold on. He was clinging to life not because he wanted to stay, but because he was afraid to let go. Again, he repeated it. I want to die, but I don't know how. My heart filled with compassion. He was frightened, truly frightened. I wrapped him in my energy and focused on offering as much comfort and love as I could. It's okay, Grandpa, I told him. There's nothing to be afraid of. I explained that where he was going, there was only love and peace, that the weight and pain of his aging body would be lifted. I told him that friends and loved ones would be there to greet him, and that when they appeared, he could go with them. I encouraged him to trust that everything he would encounter was good. He expressed regret, and I gently explained that regrets are just experiences, that they become reflections and lessons, and that all of it ultimately comes from love. I shared with him the impressions and glimpses of the heavenly realm that had been shown to me, hoping to give him a sense of what awaited him. As I did this, I felt a shift. A calm began to wash over him. The fear softened and then receded. What I was saying resonated. He felt reassured. The energy around him relaxed, and I could sense that he no longer felt afraid. Then a vivid image appeared before me. It was my grandfather and my grandmother in their 20s, young, vibrant, laughing together. It was a tender moment filled with mutual love and warmth. I sure did love her, he said. I began to cry. I could feel his sincerity so deeply. My grandfather had been a tough man, known for being harsh and at times even abusive. I knew he carried many regrets, but in that moment, it felt as though behind the hardened exterior, buried beneath years of anger and survival, there was genuine love. This was the last thought conveyed to me before he faded away. I sat up in disbelief. The experience had been so powerful, so real, that tears were still streaming down my face. Almost immediately, I felt called to share what had just happened with one of my aunts. She and I had formed a deeper connection a few years earlier, and I knew she was more spiritually open than most in my family. I wanted to tell her everything. It was too late to call, as it was in the middle of the night on the East Coast, so instead I wrote her an email. I carefully documented the experience as if it were a transcript, recounting every moment in detail, not leaving anything out. Shortly after sending it, I fell asleep. The next morning, dread washed over me. Oh no, I sent that email last night. In the clarity of the morning, embarrassment crept in. The night before, the experience had felt urgent, important to record and share, but now I worried I had acted impulsively. Reluctantly, I opened my email, bracing myself to see whether she had read it. To my surprise, there was already a response, sent just a few hours after I had written it to her, in the middle of the night. She wrote that she opened her email that morning to inform the family that my grandfather had passed away during the night. She was stunned to see that I had already written her, detailing a conversation I had experienced with him in spirit. According to the timestamp, my email had been sent in the hour of his death. She told me how deeply moved she was, and that she felt that this was his way of saying goodbye. It was especially meaningful for my grandmother, who had endured many difficult years with him, to hear him express just before passing how much he truly loved her. I was amazed. Even as someone who regularly questions my own experiences and wrestled with doubt, this moment was undeniable. Once again, I had acted on an inner urge without fully understanding why, only to discover later how perfectly it aligned. This became another moment in which I was able to come out to my family as a medium, offering proof in a way that felt serendipitous and difficult to dismiss. When I later spoke directly with my grandmother and shared the experience, I casually mentioned a small detail that I hadn't included in the original email. Almost as an afterthought, I said, it's kind of funny. He was wearing this blue plaid shirt. It really stood out to me more than anything else, like he really wanted me to notice it." My grandmother gasped. She then told me that when my grandfather passed, he had been wearing a blue plaid shirt. However, he had broken into such a heavy sweat that she didn't want the rest of the family to see him in damp clothes. Distraught, she changed his attire and dressed him in a clean white shirt before everyone arrived. No one else but her knew that he had died wearing a blue plaid shirt. She was stunned by the detail, something that had felt insignificant to me, yet meant everything to her. Once again, it became clear that the smallest details, those that don't always make sense to the medium or messenger, often carry the greatest significance for those receiving the message. They become the quiet proof, the grounding evidence, affirming the reality and the miracle of communication from spirit. Another story came in more recent years, after I had already established myself as a working clairvoyant medium. I had a client who quickly became one of my closest friends. Over time, she introduced me to her entire family, several of whom eventually came to me for psychic readings as well. She has a truly remarkable family, loving, supportive parents, and siblings who all seem to radiate the same unique light and warmth that I see in her. I was especially drawn to her mother. She was grounded, wise, and spiritually open, practicing various forms of energy healing. She carried a nurturing, motherly presence that extended beyond her own children, yet she was also cool, down to earth, and genuinely approachable. What struck me most was the relationship she shared with her children. There was a closeness and mutual respect that felt more like a deep friendship than a traditional parent child dynamic. I admired this immensely. Often I found myself thinking that my friend and her mother embodied the most ideal mother daughter relationship, one I would wish for anyone, and even for myself. Witnessing their bond gave me a tangible example of what a truly healthy relationship between mother and daughter could look like, and it frequently prompted me to reflect on my own role as a mother through the lens of her example. A few years after I met her, her mother received the devastating diagnosis of cancer. From that point on, her health gradually declined as she endured various treatments. In 2020, she succumbed to the illness, passing peacefully at home, surrounded by her entire family. Because of how deeply I loved my friend and how much I admired the woman her mother was, I felt a profound sense of grief myself when she passed. In many ways, I had come to feel like part of their family. Her loss was not just something I witnessed from the outside, it was something I felt deeply alongside them. Shortly after the announcement of her passing, a profound vision came over me. It was vivid and unmistakably strong, and I knew immediately that this was not my imagination. I was being shown something. I believed my friend's mother was sharing with me what her experience was like the moment she died. I saw her take her final breath as her spirit released from her body. Her soul lifted upward, beyond the room, as an immense light appeared high above her. A literal tunnel formed, made of billowing, layered clouds spiraling upwards, glowing with a soft golden backlight that felt both mystical and alive. I could feel the peace and surrender that washed over her. It was as though the entire life she had just lived faded into the background, becoming distant and unimportant. The only thing she could perceive was the certainty and joy of the light she was moving towards. She knew exactly what awaited her, as if the knowing had always been there, quietly held beneath the surface of her life. Without hesitation, without fear, and with complete willingness, she began to float upwards through the tunnel of clouds towards the brilliant light at its peak. Angels emerged throughout the clouds, rejoicing, praising her, singing in celebration. They welcomed her as if honoring a soul who had completed her mission. It felt like recognition, like graduation. Wings of countless angels were peeking out and layered amongst the clouds. Their presence was gentle yet powerful, their chorus beautiful beyond words. She felt seen. She felt unconditionally loved. As she ascended, I could feel her anticipation growing. She knew she was going to see him. There was no doubt, no uncertainty, only excitement and longing. With each rise, her physical age seemed to fall away. She became younger and lighter the higher she traveled until she finally reached the light. And then I saw her leap forward, diving into the deepest, most wholehearted embrace imaginable. She was no longer a grown woman, but a small girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old. Her once silver hair now long and brown, and in the body and presence of a pure, innocent child. She threw her arms around his waist with complete trust and joy. It was him, her beloved companion, her best friend, her big brother. It was Jesus. Her heart overflowed with love. She had been waiting for this reunion. In that moment, nothing else existed. The old world fell away entirely. There was only her and Jesus, and the profound love they shared. As I witnessed this, I felt my own spirit filled with closeness and reverence for him, too. It touched something deep within me. It was one of the most profoundly beautiful visions any spirit has ever shared with me about their crossing. I immediately shared the vision with my friend, knowing how much comfort it would bring her to imagine her mother's passing in this way. It resonated deeply with what her mother had shared with her throughout her life, and it felt affirming rather than surprising. My friend then shared a video that she had recorded of her mother before she passed, a keepsake the family had created by asking her questions about her life so they could always remember her in her own words. In one of the clips, they asked her about her relationship with Jesus. She went on to tell a story that left me speechless. She described having a profound encounter with Jesus when she was just a little girl. how she could see him and talk with him, and how they would spend time together regularly. She said she knew he was absolutely real, not an imaginary friend. At that time, he was her only friend, her best friend, and she experienced him as the older brother she had always wanted. She explained that from that moment on, she knew Jesus would be a central part of her spiritual life, and she devoted herself to being in service to him. Hearing this was profoundly moving. It became clear that in her passing, she had returned to the little girl she once was, the same child who first met Jesus, and back into the comfort of being with her best friend and big brother. The language she used in the video was the exact same way I had perceived him in the vision she had shared with me. That confirmation left no room for doubt. It affirmed that what I had seen was real, and that I had been shown something deeply true and sacred. I felt profoundly honored that she had shared such an intimate moment with me, and equally honored that I was able to pass that comfort and understanding on to her family. About a week after her passing, I was sitting outside beneath the full moon, taking in the beauty of the stars and the silhouettes of palm trees against a dimly lit sky. The colors were deep and cool, bright enough to see everything clearly, yet dark enough to still feel like night. To my surprise, I saw my friend's mother standing just a few meters away from me. She appeared fully embodied, grounded, calm, quietly sharing the moment with me. I was stunned by how clearly I could see her. There was nothing vague or misty about her presence. She looked whole, present, unmistakably there. Almost immediately, I felt exposed and vulnerable. I know how transparent things are in the spirit form, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she could see everything about me, sensing more of me than she ever could while she was alive. At the same time, I felt like I shouldn't be seeing her at all. I was strangely embarrassed, as if I had accidentally walked in on something private, as though I wasn't meant to be looking at her in this way. That discomfort stirred up my own insecurities. I fidgeted, unsure of what to do or how to react. Then she spoke to me. "It's okay," she said gently. "It's okay. I see you, and you can see me." A calm washed over me instantly. It suddenly felt silly that I had been embarrassed at all. She even seemed to chuckle softly at my overwhelm. I relaxed immediately. "You're beautiful," I blurted out. "You don't look at all like what I imagined you would." "Oh, really?" she replied, curious. Knowing her in life, if you had asked me to describe her energy, I might have said she was like the sun, brilliant, warm, radiant. But this was different. Yes, it was a full moon night, but what I was perceiving went far beyond the environment around us. This was her energy. She was the embodiment of the moon itself, deep, luminous, layered with muted rainbow hues, like the subtle spectrum you see on a moonlit landscape. If I could bottle the essence of moonlight in all its quiet glory, its soft but unmistakable radiance, my friend's mother would have been that bottle, completely full. It was breathtaking. I have to remember this, I thought, wanting to describe it as perfectly as possible to my friend. "What is it like?" I asked her, my curiosity getting the better of me. "Do you want me to show you?" she asked. I knew exactly what she meant, that she could let me see the world from her perspective. "Yes," I replied. "I want to see." Suddenly, my awareness shifted. I was now sensing my surroundings from her point of view. Almost immediately, I noticed another spirit standing across the field, watching in our direction. To my left, another spirit moved quietly through the tree line, seemingly minding their own business, simply going about their way. Wow, I thought. There are more spirits wandering here than I was even aware of. With her unobstructed perception, she could see all the spiritual activity unfolding within the earthly realm. Even as an open medium, I realized my own awareness was still limited. Then I saw something unsettling. A dark, shadowy figure scurried across the ground, humanoid in shape, but crawling low on all fours. It moved with an eerie urgency, carrying a heavy, disruptive energy. It felt menacing. From her perspective, though, there was no fear, no reaction, just a clear knowing. This was not an earthbound soul wandering. This was something different, a dark entity, the kind that disrupts energy, causes problems, and siphons from the living world. What some might call a demon, lurking at the edges. She did not judge it, she simply acknowledged its presence, understanding that these unseen influences hover close to the world of the living, and that in spirit form, everything is revealed. Even to someone like me, she showed me, perception has its limits. She then told me that after she reunited with Jesus, she had voluntarily come back close to the earthly realm so she could support her family as they grieved her passing. "I know where I'm going," she said. I know the door is open for me, and when I cross through it, it'll be eternal. For now, I'm going to take my time and be with my family so I can comfort them during this difficult period. Don't worry about me, she added gently. I'll go when I feel complete, but I'll be around for just a little while more. With that, our conversation came to a close. Her presence began to soften, thinning like moonlight dissolving into the darkness, until she gently faded from view. If I hadn't already thought that this was a remarkable woman, I was even more struck by her choice to linger, not out of fear, confusion, or attachment, but out of love. To return briefly, fully aware of where she was destined to go, simply to offer comfort to those she loved. It spoke volumes about who she was. I felt deeply honored, not only that she took time to visit me, but that she trusted me enough to share something new about the spirit realm. The next day, I called my friend. I couldn't wait to tell her about my encounter with her mother. I recounted the entire experience, and as I spoke, I could hear the emotion rising in her voice on the other end of the line. Then she said, "You're not going to believe this, but right now, I'm wearing my mother's t-shirt." She paused. On the front of it, she continued, it says, "Moon Goddess." I felt a chill running through me. She went on to tell me that all week long, one single verse of a song had been looping in her mind over and over again, so persistently that she had finally written it down in her journal the day before. It was the song Moon Shadow by Cat Stevens, and the line she had written was, "I'm being followed by a moon shadow, moon shadow, moon shadow." To that, all I could say was, wow. Spirits have the most magical ways of letting us know that they're still with us. These moments, quiet, personal, and impossibly specific, were some of the experiences that helped validate and shape my understanding of how communication in the spirit realm truly works. Messages don't always arrive in thunderclaps or visions. More often, they weave themselves gently into the fabric of our lives through symbols, synchronicities, songs, words, or objects that carry meaning only to those meant to receive them. Know that messages can come through in infinite ways, some subtle, some unmistakably direct. And if you're open to the possibility, if you slow down and pay attention, you may begin to notice them appearing in the most unexpected places. Thank you for listening. Blessings.